Welcome to Independence, the FIEC podcast. My name's Phil Topham. I'm Executive Director of the FIEC, and with me today is our Head of National Ministries, Adrian Reynolds. Good morning, Adrian, and a Happy New Year.
Well, a Happy New Year to you, Phil, and to everyone who's listening. How many pop songs can you name that are based around Happy New Year?
I can't name any off the top of my head, I don't think.
You are not the cultural icon.
No, I mean, I could do some Christmas ones.
ABBA?
Wizard, Slade. No,
ABBA, Happy New Year? No?
I've never heard of that.
Deacon Blue?
Old Lang Syne.
Old Lang Syne. Well, anyway, we won't be singing those in the office.
We will, but we are going to talk today about the year ahead. What's ahead for FIEC? What's ahead for us as an organisation, as a family of churches? But before we get into that, what do we think some of the trends are going to be this year, both in the culture and in the church? Let me kick you off. In the culture, the cost of living crisis is going to dominate, isn't it? That's going to be a big theme this year.
Well, I wonder if it's it's interesting. We don't want to get into the news too much, but Rishi Sunak has just given his little speech. There are some dominant themes there, aren't there?
Yeah.
So it's cost of living crisis.
Yeah,
it's NHS waiting lists. It's about migration.
Yep.
That's going to constantly be in the news. So cost of living crisis is going to loom very large, I guess, for our churches and for members of our churches. For
individuals. Yeah. In terms of the church, things that perhaps won't make it into Rishi's top 5 list, but what kind of things do you think the church will be wrestling with?
Well, here's one that perhaps ought to make it into Rishi's list, which is, I think, we're reeling a little bit, aren't we? Evangelicals are reeling from scandals and rumours and accusations and all sorts of things that have been going on. And I think multiplied so that they look as though they're happening in every church, which they're not, but that there are leadership crises, I think, in terms of culture. And I think, rightly, there will be a reflection this year more on culture. And I think, actually, that's one of the things that FIEC can do is we can help our churches think clearly about what a healthy leadership culture looks like. We had a great seminar at the Leaders Conference. I don't know if you've listened to it. Richard and Karen Macy did it. Really super. And we'll put the link through to that. Just to begin to think about how do we develop really healthy leadership cultures. Well, what's very interesting, I think, you see more of these, Phil, than I do, so you'll be able to comment on this more than I can. But I think it's interesting how many of the scandals, if you like, or the bad leadership decisions could have been avoided if there had been better processes, better cultures in place.
I think that's possibly true. I don't think COVID has helped in some ways because I think we've become more disembodied over a couple of years. So we've not been gathering in the same room with people. I think that has not helped. I don't think that's the root problem.
So do you think that's about relationships,
Correct.
Isn't it?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I think it's relational, and I think we need to think about that in terms of the way we pastor our people, the way we care for the flock.
So it's interesting, isn't it? We tend to think about regathering. Post-COVID, we talked about regathering in terms of just getting people back to church, back to meetings. But actually, it's about recommuning, isn't it? It's regathering into community. That's a thing I think we've got to really invest in. And I think that means for some churches, as it indeed it has for FIEC office staff, that sometimes you just need to get together and not have a plan for what you do, just to hang out and spend time together.
Absolutely.
And that's been missing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So when are we going to watch Bolton this year?
I think we're at Burton Albion in a few weeks, which is just not. That was the game we never got to last year because we got waterlogged pitch, it got called off. So you mentioned we can help churches this year. What do you mean by that? What's FIEC for in that respect?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, people, you know this because people phone you up first of all when they want to think about joining FIEC or indeed leaving. But let's think about joining for a moment. And one of the questions people often ask is, what's FIEC for? Or more crudely, what do I get for my money? Which is a fair enough question, isn't it? And when we go to churches and we talk to church members who are more removed, if you like, from the network of churches, that's one of the questions people often ask. We pay this sum of money every year. What do we get for it? And I think, broadly speaking, that the answer to the question is very, very simple. That what we exist for here centrally is simply to help our churches. We're not a denomination. We try and do some of the things that a denomination would efficiently, but we don't have any authority or any control or power, and that's right because we're a network of independent churches. But what we can do centrally, employed by our churches, that's what we're here to do, is help our churches. And we do that in a number of different ways. We do it as individuals in one-to-one meetings or just to a few. And then there are sort of national things that we do as well. And so one of the ideas behind having this episode really is just to say, what are some of the ways we want to try and help our churches in 2023?
And one of those ways is coming up next week. We've got the Hub Conference. Now, by the time this goes out, I think bookings will have closed. But training is helping our leaders.
I'm just looking across to our producer, Joel. Is it? Okay, yes. Bookings have closed for the Hub Conference. By the time this gets but that is one of the ways we help churches and leaders to think about raising the next generation, isn't it? It is. And again, Hub Conference is a really good example of how the relationship between us centrally and churches work. Yeah. It's not a selection conference. People don't come along and get the sort of the FIEC seal of approval. There is no such thing. The choice of raising people up for leadership and training them, that's the responsibility of the local church. But we're there to help local churches as they seek to raise people up. And actually, people come along to the Hub just for time away from church, to meet some other people, to explore some different opportunities. And we work with church leaders to help and advise and counsel. And it's really thrilling this year, actually, to see numbers up, to see that pipeline begin to strengthen again. I think over the last 10 years, one of my observations, it's just anecdotal, looking at the leaders' conference, is the average age of an FIEC leader is definitely younger. It needs to be younger still, though. And we need to get a new generation of leaders serving in churches and working in churches and equipped to do that. And so actually it's really thrilling to see. I think we've just got over 60 people coming this year so far, and the bookings are still open as we speak. So really thrilling to see, people actually really seriously thinking about ministry, and we want to help churches in that.
And it's not just senior pastors, is it? So this is men and women who will be seeing at the Hub. And then we've got lots of things coming up for women this year as well in terms of
that's right. And I think the ministry that we provide for women in ministry, or the service that help we provide for women in ministry, whether those are wives of people who are serving or those who are serving in their own right, importantly, I think that's a really key part of our work. And the two, we run two conferences. We provide lots of other things as well, but we provide two conferences, one for ministry wives, which is called
the Ministry Wives Retreat.
Ministry Wives Retreat.
Yes.
And then we run another called Thrive, which is for women who are serving in ministry. They're both in May.
And that's for women who've been set aside by their church for pastoral ministry amongst women, isn't it?
That's right.
Specifically,
that's right. And we've moved the venue this year because we were full up. So we've moved to the Hayes Conference Centre, which means there's plenty of scope. So I think if you're listening to this and you're thinking, how can the church serve people like that well? One of the things to do is to give them fellowship and help and input from other women who are serving.
I think I narrowed that too much as well. I don't think it's just for women who've been set aside to serve amongst other women. I think it's women who've been set aside to serve in pastoral ministry of any sort.
Exactly right. Yeah. And just a plea on that, really, which is I think the Ministry Wise Conference is really important. I've been involved with conferences for ministers for a number of years, probably 15 years almost. And I think the Wives Conferences are really, really important. And I think churches should be investing in the wives of those who are serving. And not having, the wives shouldn't have to pay for themselves. They should be sent along by churches. So there's something to think about. And that's an awkward conversation, isn't it, Phil? Because, if you're the pastor of a church, going along to the elders meeting and saying, will the church pay for my wife to come along? Yeah. So instead, you just send a copy of this podcast to your other elders.
Listen to this between about minutes 7.
This is the way that the FIEC are going to help you, is by trying to persuade the church that actually that's a really good investment to make.
Now, you've talked a bit there about sort of training for those who are in pastoral ministry in churches, perhaps paid positions. Yeah. What about those who are in leadership in churches, elders perhaps specifically, but they've got full-time jobs. They are, they're working outside of the church, but also serving within the church.
Yeah, it's interesting.
How do we help there?
Most of our churches have plural leaderships, and have men serving in all kinds of capacities as volunteers, but we provide very little input for them. And the reason for that is just a very hard thing to do, because typically an elder in a church might have a full-time job, family. He's struggling to get along to an elders meeting, frankly, let alone to a training program. So that they tend to be very time poor, sometimes cash rich, but very time poor. And so I know you've been an elder in church. When you held down a full-time job, what was it like?
Yeah, actually I didn't. So I'm not a great example. So I worked 4 days a week and gave the other day to church.
Okay,
so I was a bit more, it wasn't bivocational as such, but
I think that is bivocational.
Well, I didn't feel like that, but because that wasn't how I termed it. That's very kind of you. But it obviously, I think if I'd not had that Friday, to plan services, write sermons, that kind of thing, do some pastoral visiting. That would have been very full and more difficult. I think actually it would have just meant I would have been able to do less.
Yeah. And you'd have been stretched,
yes,
I guess. So just a little aside, little bypath meadow, as Bunyan would say. I think that's quite interesting. We need to develop more of those kind of flexible models where people are serving in that way, maybe newly retireds or people's who can, their jobs can, give them that flexibility.
I think it's worth me saying, I made myself sound very holy there. That wasn't quite what happened. It was more that I applied for a job that wasn't full-time, and so I kind of fell into it.
Phil, but I've always thought of you as a holy
I just think it's just worth saying it wasn't it wasn't necessarily a deliberate decision.
Well, God's providence is a marvelous thing,
exactly.
Phil.
And it was I'm not saying it was a bad thing, it was a good thing, but it wasn't quite as intentional as that. But that's how it worked.
So we've tried to invest in providing some training for elders, and there are a few things that we're doing. 3 things really that spring to mind, and this might be something you want to pass on in your church to guys. So the first is, if they've just got a morning and they're in the Southwest, I'm involved in running a Southwest Gospel Partnership morning really for elders, which is at the end of January, 28th of January. It's a Saturday morning. It's in Bristol and or Bath or somewhere there.
In that neck of the woods.
Neck of the woods, somewhere beginning with B. And I'm going to be working with Ed Moll, who's an Anglican minister from the Southwest. And we're going to split into tracks for independent and Anglican leaders. And we're going to provide some input for, a very limited amount of input, obviously, in the morning. So that's one idea. And the second thing is something I'm a bit more excited. Well, I'm excited about that. Sorry to give the wrong impression. I'm very excited about that. I'm super excited about something we've developed with Keswick.
Yeah. You've been heavily involved in this, haven't you?
Yeah. So right from the outset, really, we were thinking some of the training we want to provide to what we're calling lay leaders, although I know we don't like that term, but it works itself into a word. So training for lay leaders, we've been doing that with Keswick, and we've got a kind of, I don't want to call it a boot camp because it's not so full on, but we planned a kind of a weekend that's a day forward of a weekend. Now, Phil, hold on to yourself because this is quite exciting. You're going to have to work this out. It runs Thursday to Saturday, which I know is not a normal weekend.
Oh, well, that's a clever idea, isn't it? Because people can be back for local church on the Sunday.
Well, that was the idea. So Thursday evening, and then it means that people can just take one day holiday from work or a day off from work, and they can actually get the equivalent of a weekend but still be back for church life and have a bit of a rest. That was the idea. So we're running that with the folks at Keswick, and that's happening in March. You can find out more by searching for Leading Well on the Keswick website. And what was really exciting about that last year is a church in Derby brought their whole eldership team. And this year, an FIEC church in Southampton, of all places, which is quite a long way from Keswick, are taking their whole eldership team.
Fantastic.
And so that's a really good idea just for developing and growing and learning together. And then at Word Alive each year, a few of us run what's called an equip track, which again is for lay leaders, is for elders, for example, in church. So if you're along at Word Alive, that would be a great thing to tap into.
Is that what Ray's involved in with you guys?
So Ray Evans, who works for us, and Marcus Honeysett, and Tim Ward, who's one of the trainers at Oak Hill College, John Stevens and myself, we run that. Oh, and Jen Charteris.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Super.
I forgot to introduce Jen Charteris. Which just makes me, just reminds me, talking about Ray, we have had some staff changes, Phil. So in terms of how we serve our churches, we basically serve our churches by employing people.
Yeah.
And then asking those people to serve individual churches, produce resources, that kind of stuff. So there have been some staff changes, haven't there, that will actually impact and hopefully benefit considerably the service, the help that we're able to provide to churches. Just outline some of the things that are going on.
So we've got some new directors for different local areas who will be starting this year. So essentially, we're seeking to give people help on the ground where they are. So if your church is in a particular geographical area, what we're trying to do is develop some pilot projects whereby we can ask a guy to serve a day or two a week in that particular geographical area, just to help gather churches, work alongside them, get alongside them, serve and support.
So they're pilots in one sense, but not in another, are they? Because we've had a Scotland director for Scotland,
and that's what they're based on. So the two that are starting on the 1st of February are director for the West Midlands, which is Paul Mallard, and also director for South Wales, which is Gareth Lewis. So those ones are definitely starting on the 1st of February, and we're hoping to have another one starting in Suffolk later on this year. And then also with Paul's appointment, he's not just going to be serving as director for the West Midlands; he's also going to be giving us a lead on theology. And you can probably say a bit more about that because you've been involved in it, haven't you?
We over lockdown, we had a deep, hard, long look at really what FIEC does and how we're structured and the kind of help that we are providing to churches, and asked lots of questions about where are the gaps. And we identified some of the gaps. Yeah. And some of the key gaps, in fact, 4 of the key gaps that we weren't really addressing and we wanted to get to grips with. And we're going to address them in different ways. But the 4 key gaps were helping churches think clearly about evangelism locally, and what that means, how they are effective in their outreach. Helping churches think clearly about how they disciple people. How do they equip people to live for where they are? How do they equip people to be nurses and to be council workers and teachers, and how do they equip people who are struggling with maybe unemployment or disability, or those kinds of questions about discipleship, parenting.
I think that just on that's really important, isn't it? Because sometimes I think we think when we've got a really good man or woman in our church, we immediately think, they need to go into some kind of ministry. Actually, first and foremost, they need to be really good Christian men or women in the place where God has placed them. And actually, you might not have anybody else in that situation who's speaking up for the Lord Jesus.
Yeah,
but
that's
those
right.
people are.
Yeah. And, the Pope has just died, or the old Pope has just died. And it's a good reminder that there are lots of points of difference between Protestantism and Catholicism. And one of them is this sacred secular divide. We don't believe in a sacred secular divide in that sense. So actually your calling is divine, whether you're called to be, a council worker on the, helping on the streets, or whether you're called to be a minister of a church.
Absolutely.
It's still a divine calling for you to act out. Yeah. So discipleship, local church leadership, which is constantly a challenge, which is not just, it's deeper and broader and wider than I think we often think about it. So it's not just about raising up new full-time workers. It's about equipping volunteers and how we do that. It's about thinking of some different models, perhaps, of workers in church life.
Actually, Ray and I recorded a podcast about that before Christmas, which will be coming out in the weeks ahead. So
I look forward to it. There we go.
Excellent.
And final one, which is where Paul Mallard comes in, is thinking about theology in the local church. And this isn't just a kind of dry and dusty, what do we think about eternal subordination of the Son? But actually is thinking about how do we as leaders help our churches be theologically, doctrinally rigorous and appropriately so. So actually, it's not just about what do I as a church leader believe about subject A. It's actually how do I communicate that truth to the church, and how do I work out how that truth cashes out in real life for the church?
Yeah.
How does it inform our praying as a church, or our singing as a church, or what we do in small groups? So Paul Mallard is going to lead that work, which I'm really excited about. And we're kicking off with that, hopefully towards the end of February, I think.
Yep, fantastic. And of course, as was mentioned before Christmas on a podcast you did with John, Graham Bynum will be joining us as our new head of local ministries later in the year as well, which is extremely exciting.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Andy Hunt has been doing a great job looking after that sort of part of the work while Johnny's been recovering, praying on for Johnny, of course, to make a full recovery. And part of that are the local conferences, aren't they? Tell us, Phil, what are the local conferences for? Yeah,
so what the local conferences are designed to kind of rub into local church life, the stuff we've done at the Leaders Conference. So obviously we thought a bit about doctrine, about our history, about contending for the faith in the book of Jude when we gathered in November. And really the local conferences are about how does that cash out on the ground for you as a local church leader? Right. So there are a number of these up and down the country, 20 plus, aren't there, where we take some of that work and we just kind of, if you like, massage it into local church life.
Okay, and we're calling them Just Good Friends, which was an 80s sitcom.
It was.
Phil, you're far too young to remember an 80s sitcom.
Far too young.
I'm almost too young. John Stevens remembers it very well because he's pretty old. I only just remember it.
Just for the record, he's several months older than you, isn't he? And that's about it.
Older, I think, is the important part. Just Good Friends, a slightly naff middle-class sitcom, which was filmed just round the road from where I lived. So there you go. That's how I know about it, because one of our friends, Lauren, it was her house, which was very exciting.
Oh, interesting.
Got paid a ton of cash by the BBC. So yes, it's about connecting people. There will be one near you. So look up the dates, look up the places. We'd love to see you there. I think that's really important. And the Leaders Conference was great. Are you still basking in some of the joy of the Leaders Conference, Phil?
I mean,
you were a little bit nervous because new venue.
It was. I mean, I can be honest with everybody. I just spent the first sort of 36 hours troubleshooting, quite honestly. So I was,
You had a full head of hair.
Yeah, well, I did before the conference.
But
it was it was a good time, and we're grateful to the Lord. And it was really good to gather, and it was great to have almost 1,000 people singing together.
All the resources up.
I think everything's up now. So all the
so if you missed
seminars,
a seminar,
they were
and
all
you're thinking, I wish I'd gone to that. Yeah, I heard that was really good.
Yeah, they're only audio versions of the seminars. They weren't filmed, but great to listen while you're out for a run.
A couple of highlights that I've listened to. I was in. I hosted actually the Laces, again, Richard and Carolyn Laces seminar on creating a healthy church culture. I thought that was super. 2 other seminars I've listened to, which I think are really high quality, are Graham Bynan's, who's coming to work for us. His one on some of the challenges facing churches, which I think ties into what we're talking about today. I think that's well worth an hour of your time, really clear just on what it means to be an independent church and how churches can support one another and connect together. And then Phil Swan's seminar on trauma. You hosted
I hosted it. Yeah.
I thought it was great. Again, really insightful. And this is one of the hot topics for us at the moment.
Absolutely. I thought Phil's seminar was the best seminar on any topic I've ever heard. That's quite a claim, isn't it?
Hang on. The best
seminar on any topic it was the best seminar I've ever sat in, full stop.
Okay.
Just because it was practically helpful, it was down to earth, it was clear. He was careful in the way he answered questions at the end. I just thought it was essential listening.
Have you told Phil that?
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Phil, if you're listening, the best seminar Phil Topham has ever been in.
And the other one I was in, which was also excellent, was Colin Adams on how you deal with divisions in your eldership and how you lead well when you're not united. That was really, really helpful. Okay. Practical wisdom for how you bring people along and how you arrive at a decision, how you present that to the church. I think all of that is just really, really helpful.
Some really great content.
Great content to listen back to. And it's super.
It makes me eager for this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And just tell us a bit about what's happening in November.
So 6th to 8th of November, same place, under the lights of Blackpool. Topic, Ministry of Justice. We're thinking about justice and in broad and specific terms, what it means to be those who follow a God of justice and seek to live in just ways in the world. That's quite a contentious subject. And we think we're mature enough to be able to tackle a contentious subject. We're not all going to agree on every element of it, but we want to explore it together and make sure that we are living in ways that reflect God's goodness and justice in the world without losing sight of the gospel calling we have to go and make disciples. So it's a tricky subject, and we're planning it through at the moment, so do pray for that. But actually, I think a really important one.
And we can be a great fellowship together, can't we? Even if we don't agree on every nuance of every detail. That's the whole point of FIEC. We disagree on matters that aren't core and central to the central gospel truth.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
One of the things we launched this last couple of years has been the podcast, that we're now involved in.
The podcast, Phil.
But
award-winning pod. Everybody claims they're award-winning.
Come on.
I think if you give yourself an award, you can claim to be award-winning. We're not award-winning.
We're not award-winning. We just talk about ministry.
I just wanted to get in the phrase award-winning into the podcast.
It just isn't that. It's completely fake news. Just tell us a bit about what we've got planned for the podcast for this year, because actually there are lots of topics we can pick up on, lots of things we can do kind of broad introductions to. We can go specific on some things, but not everything. What kind of things are we going to be thinking about? Well,
first of all, we want it to be a podcast that helps people. So if there are things that you particularly think we ought to be tackling, do drop a line to producer Joel. So Joel at fiec.org.uk. He'd love to hear from you.
Joel or Joel.Murray? Just Joel at.
Yeah,
okay,
just
there we are. Joel at. There we
I
are.
knew that because I sent him lots of emails.
Okay, fine.
So Joel at fiec.org.uk. We'd love to hear from you because we do actually want it to be useful.
Yeah.
The most listened to episodes tend to be the news items, so we're carrying on with those with old man John's cultural analysis.
Poor John, not here to, he's on holidays. He's not here to defend himself.
He is empirically older than me, so there we are. He'll be really cross with me for saying that. So I repent publicly. So we'll carry on with that. So some other things coming up. We're going to do a podcast on helping people with sight loss.
Oh, that's an interesting topic, isn't it? Because so here where we are in Market Hub, we've got Trust for the Blind,
that's right,
a Christian charity who help people with sight loss. How do we get into that? How do we want to help people with that?
Well, I don't want to spoil it.
Okay, fine.
Who
are you planning to speak to?
We've got someone from the Torch Trust coming to speak to us,
great.
and we're hoping to have someone who suffers with sight loss himself come and contribute. We've got a number of people in the church here in Harborough. Actually, it's really important to think about as church leaders, how do we serve the breadth of people that are in church? And there are different issues. We did a very brief, and probably we need to come back to this subject, thing about children with autism, and very well received podcast. We need to come back to that subject, I think. So we need to be thinking all the time, don't we, about the people who are in front of us and how we serve them. So we're going to be thinking about that. Along those lines, we're also going to be thinking a little bit about how we help people with same-sex attraction. So we're going to be doing that with Andy Robinson from Living Out. We've got some plans to do some podcasts on anti-Semitism, which I think is a hot topic, and rightly so. We need to be thinking clearly about that. Julian Gadsby from London Institute for Contemporary Christianity is booked in, and we want to be exploring how we help people live their Christianity out in the workplace. How do we as leaders help them. And that's a really important question for us as leaders, because very often we're one step removed from the workplace. We've forgotten what it was like to be in a secular workplace, and that's really important. And then I think there are just lots of pastoral issues, transgenderism, things that are coming up that we really need to be wrestling with. And then one or two lighter moments along the way as well, I hope. So lots of topics.
The transgender debate, let's just touch on that for a moment. So you said something before we started recording, which I think was really helpful, which is actually these things all feel like debates to be issued until you're presented with the reality in a church setting. Just explore that with me for a moment.
I remember very clearly as a very green pastor having a very clear idea in my mind of what I believed about marriage and divorce, until I was presented with my first really tricky pastoral situation, which was a couple who weren't married but had been together for 20 years, and had 3 children. But he wasn't a Christian. She was a backsliding Christian. She suddenly came back to the Lord. Now, what do you do with a couple like that? There's all kinds of questions about, are they married? Are they not? What do you think a godly life is in those circumstances? Does she just leave her partner and children? And suddenly you realise that when it comes to actually real people in front of you, you've got to have the groundwork of what do we believe about this? What do we believe about that? But you've also got to have the pastoral wisdom to be able to apply those truths. And I think one of the challenges with transgender questions, and in fact, lots of these pastoral questions, is that we have lots of debates about what we believe about, in the classroom, if you like, what the A, B, and C of these questions are. But we don't really do the hard graft of thinking, how do we apply pastoral wisdom in that circumstance? And I think another good example of that is complementarianism. That, if another book is written about what we believe about complementarianism, I think I'll tear my hair out and look like you, Phil. But actually, people are beginning now to write books. And in fact, Graham Biner's just written Mum and Jane Tour about how do you apply that into church life. It's so needed. So I think we've got to move from just theology to pastoral theology that actually applies what you know into the context where we live. And I think that will be one of the challenges with transgenderism. If you have someone who's self-identified as a man and is converted and wants to think about church leadership, but was born a woman, what do you do with that?
These are the practical questions.
Absolutely.
Real people made in the image of God.
And that, by the way,
before.
is a real question.
Absolutely.
That's what we've been dealing with this year.
Absolutely.
And the other thing to say about this year, Phil, is we're still 100.
Yeah, we were 100 last year. We're 101 in November. So but we are still celebrating, aren't we? So we had to postpone our anniversary service from October because of the rail strikes. It's now happening.
So that won't be a problem again.
So we're now gathering on the 22nd of April, which is a Saturday afternoon at Westminster Chapel. I think service is at 3:30.
Sometime in the afternoon.
Yeah, I'm looking to Joel for confirmation. It was. He doesn't know either. It's on the website. Do still book. We need to know how many are coming along so we can cater properly. It would be great to see as many people there as
actually,
possible.
if you've had folk in your church, perhaps who have been serving in the FIEC in the past in different ways, it'd be great to see them. We want it to be a recognition, really, and to honour those who have served over lots and lots of years. And lots of our churches will have people who have quietly served in different ways. They've helped out at conferences and stewarding and serving. And, when we were at, I don't know, Pwllheli or...
So great opportunity to honour those who've gone before, who've laid the foundations, and who've helped FIEC to keep moving. That's right. That's just really helpful.
So 22nd of April, that would be.
Yeah. I think the service is at 2:30. I think we'll be done by 4 o'clock.
Did that come in your ears?
No, it didn't. I think I've just remembered. So I think we're wrapped up by 4 o'clock. So so we're just working towards that. So
and Pray for 100 is ongoing as well, Phil. So Pray for 100 is the way we really want to commemorate the 100 years is by looking forward and praying for 100 mission initiatives. So there's a little book, which if you came to the Leaders Conference, you would have got. We also sent one to every church. And we'd love churches to order a number of copies that they want to use in their church. We're happy to give one to every member. So we're republishing that at the beginning of this year. There's a form online. We'll put the link on. And we'd love churches to say, I'd love 100 copies. I'd love 80 copies, 20 copies. I'd love 500 copies if you're a larger church. And what we'd love to do is just get churches praying for the breadth of work that's going on in FIEC. It seems to us that that's the best way to mark a centenary actually is to commit ourselves to this ongoing work together.
And it's wonderfully encouraging. So I was at a church at the beginning of December visiting them about potential FIEC affiliation, and I took a bunch of the Pray for 100s along. We sat in small groups, we prayed, and it was wonderful because people were flicking through it and they knew some of the churches in there, and they were saying things like, oh, my daughter went there when she was at uni, let's pray for that church. And people are just really excited to make those connections. I think that's just a brilliant way.
It is thrilling, isn't it?
Of marking 100 years.
We'll also, just worth saying, over the year, we'll be serving at lots of different events.
Yeah.
One of the ways we can serve our churches is by serving at events that people from our churches go to. So you may see us at Bible by the Beach, Paul Mallard's speaking there. You may see us at Keswick. Lots of people from the FIEC involved at Keswick, and we're very fond of our friends at Keswick and all the hard work they do there. Word Alive and the European Leadership Forum. It's worth mentioning that. So it tends not to be on our radars. Happens in Poland. The European Leadership Forum gathers leaders, younger leaders from all around Europe. And actually, if you're thinking about how can I get some mentoring, how can I get some training, that could be a really good thing to plug into. Not least because it gives you exposure to what's going on across Europe, but actually is really exciting. So a few of us, Jonathan Bond, John Stevens, and myself, we help out at that. And if you wanted to be part of that, drop me a line in the office. I'll be happy to chat to you about it.
Lots going on then in 2023. Adrian, thanks so much for filling us in on some of that stuff. We look forward to the year ahead.
It's worth saying,
for it. That was going to be my outro. What's going on there?
I don't want to have the last word. It's worth saying that the thing we're hoping for most of all is that our churches will flourish.
And grow. And that people will become Christians.
So what do we want? We want people to be added.
Yeah.
Just think of that wonderful phrase in Acts, those, who believe the message, those who were added daily to the number who are being saved. We'd love to see conversions, and we want to see saints built up. And, when we talk about churches flourishing, we're thinking about healthy church cultures, we're thinking about leaders being raised up, but especially we're thinking about people being saved with the good news and people growing in their faith in Christ Jesus. And all of this that we've talked about, that's all a means to an end. And none of that is a thing in itself. And I think once we start believing that all this stuff is a thing in itself, we get up ourselves a little bit, and it's really unhelpful, really unhealthy, in fact. The means only to a greater end, which is to see the Church of Christ Jesus flourish. That's an even better outro.
So Psalm 115, verse 1, to you, Lord.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. Thanks so much for listening. This has been Independence, the FIEC podcast. Do rate, leave a review so that others can find it. And if it's been helpful, do share it as well. Adrian, thanks for chatting.
Young Adrian.
Yeah, young Adrian. Happy New Year.
Yeah, happy New Year.
And we look forward to seeing lots of you through 2023.
Take care.